All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Welcome to the Nailed Pitch with Carl Ponto. My company is called Squash and Stretch Productions, and I'm super excited to have as my guest today. He is a man who has long made it his business to understand how trust impacts success. Corporations he has worked with, you may be familiar with, are Intel, Tektronix, Sequent, Freightliner, and Pentax. Jerry Fletcher is CEO of his own marketing consulting firm and now has 33 years of experience. He is a professional speaker with international credentials, author of 4 books, and an angel investor in his hometown of Portland, Oregon. He's considered a master of the art of networking and trust-based business development. He advises consultants that are changing the way business is done around the corner and around the world. He named Digimarc and helped raise $500,000 in just 17 days for the startup. He's added $1.2 million to the first quarter income of a consulting firm with a single suggestion. He increased leads by 1,200% for a consultant with a simple profile change on LinkedIn. And he tells me he has stopped counting successful introductions of new products and services at 207. It's actually my dad's lucky number. That's a cool number. Today, he will share secrets of how to build trust and the impact of your funding presentations from both sides of the pitch deck. Please help me welcome the master of consultant marketing, Jerry Fletcher.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that introduction.
Hey, I'm so glad you're here. So yes, like we were talking a little bit before we jumped on the stream about how so many pitch decks, so many presentations you see founders come to present to VCs, present to investors, are in dire need of improvement. So what are some of the biggest things you see that people like do wrong that could easily be fixed and make their presentations way better?
I think the number one thing that most of them don't really understand is that how investors are looking at that presentation. The single most important thing in almost any presentation is the experience that the team has that you're saying is going to build this new product or service. That's number one. And the second one, and I'm going to do a very bad imitation of an old movie, but they seem to have a failure to communicate. The thing that I find most useful in any presentation is, you have to remember that in today's world, you've got at a max 3 seconds to brand yourself, 15 seconds to make sure that the world can refer you. And after that, it's just, laying on good stuff. So if you think about that, if you ever noticed the first slide of a pitch deck can be all over the lot, but the tendency is to say, this is how big the market is, and we're going to get this much of it, and you won't believe how good we're going to do that. Well, I'd rather hear our product is this or that or whatever it happens to be, and it serves this purpose and it gets this done for people. In very rough words, you need to be able to tell people what it is that it does. I can't understand why most pitch decks don't start out with a simple statement, 7 words or less of what this product is, who it's for, and what it does. I mean, just tell me that. Now, if I'm interested, I'll stick with you, and you can tell me all these other things, and you can introduce your team and tell me why they are going to be able to do what it is you say they're going to do. And that's the major problems that I see. But more importantly, I'll give you for instance, a friend and I, who are both investors in the local group here, angel investors. What we decided to do was, because people need to have some sort of critique on what they're doing in terms of marketing, was to offer that to all of the folks that we were investing in. And so we've done a number of those. And the other day, I spent 90 minutes getting enough information from a client, an organization, excuse me, that we're investing in. I spent 90 minutes just getting an idea of who they are and how they work. I mean, it shouldn't take that long, It ought to be totally apparent within the first slide, within the first 3 seconds. This is who we are and this is what we do. Oh, okay, fine. But that doesn't happen. And in fact, how do I say this? In terms of holding me in a presentation or holding anyone in a presentation, getting them to stay on board with you. That's the single most critical thing. The next most critical thing, of course, is the team. Telling me that someone who has no experience in social media is going to lead your social media activities is enough to fill me up right to here. It's like, no, that ain't going to work. Another one that really gets me is, well, I had this happen to me. As you said in the introduction, I helped put a company called Digimarc on the map. In fact, I named it and helped them raise $500,000 in 17 days. But at one point, I was working with them in terms of doing their marketing, and I was asked if I would become the CEO. And I sat there and thought about it for maybe 20 or 30 seconds and said no. And people looked at me like I was crazy. It's like, you don't get this kind of offer every day. And I went, you don't understand. I've been a CEO. I know what it takes. I know what you need to do to make that position work and to make the company work. And I am not the right guy for this company at this time. We need to find somebody else with more experience, more background, and someone that we can represent on the team as having that background and experience, because it's absolutely critical that you've got good people in position. One of the problems I see in second, third, major investment rounds in companies is that the person who started the company and who's been the CEO for the last 3 years is going to continue in that role. And that's a problem, because quite truthfully, they may not be as qualified as someone that you could bring in and put on that team who might lead it further, faster, and better. Am I doing okay here, Carl?
Yeah, this is great. I mean, it's something I've been seeing a lot lately when it comes to what startups need when it comes to that sort of C-suite leadership, is that the kind of the fractional model of like CXOs, that you don't want to necessarily bring on someone that you expect to be in that role for the next like 20 years. You want someone who's the right fit for the right time for like early stage growth. And once you start to like, if you're starting to think about like a merger and acquisition sort of thing, you wanted someone else in that role who has better skill sets for that sort of stage in the process. And so I think it's absolutely right that you need to have the right people at the right time and the right roles. And I think it's a continuation of the trend of the gig economy and more people like switching jobs more often to find the right fit for them at the right time and the right fit for the company. Because it's not, like you said, you don't need one person in the same role for different stages of the company is probably not the best fit. And it's gonna, with how fast things move and how agile you have to be, if you have someone in that critical of a role for very long at all, it's going to cause all sorts of chaos and issues down the line. They're going to be a lot harder to fix than if you just said, especially if it's an early stage founder, just okay, they make you a board member, get a CEO in there who knows how to grow a company properly and knows how to lead the team properly, and make sure it's done right. And that also just, again, like you said, it makes the investors or potential investors more likely to buy in, because they're not seeing this huge red flag of someone who's never grown a startup before, just saying we're going to try and scale it 10x over the next couple of years. It's like, have you ever done that before? No. Then you should be on the board or like some other role besides the CEO, because it's just not something you're likely to be able to pull off.
That is absolutely truth. I mean, again, as an investor, I look at it and that's a major problem, and it happens all the time. I mean, as people get into about the third year, you can really see that starting to happen, and happen well or happen badly. We have one group that we're investing in right now where literally it's a biopharmacological kind of company, and the founder of the company has actually started and run 2 other companies before this one. Do you think we're not ready to reinvest and invest more in that company? I mean, he knows what he's doing. And on top of that, they have the intellectual property that can't be touched, and it's already been granted. So, what do you say? And we were talking the other day, again, I do this 20 questions thing on their marketing. and he and his folks were in, and I said, so what's the next round look like? And he said, well, we have two choices. I said, what's that? He said, well, we can either go for the money, or we can go for the money and to do an offering of the company. And I said, so what's the money look like? He said, well, in this business, it's really hard. You really have to have a lot. So our next round is about 65 million.
Whoa.
Yeah, we're talking big time. And this organization, based on their IP, is going to revolutionize the treatment of cancer around the world. There's absolutely no question about it, because what they've done is they found a way to keep cancer cells alive in a petri dish and to be able to test all the different kinds of things you might, how you might treat that patient. So it's a beautiful piece of work, which again, this young man was he was teaching and doing scientific work at, I won't mention the university, it's in southern United States. But they didn't really quite understand what he was doing. And so they said, no, you go ahead. If you want to patent it, that's fine. He has full rights to this. And it's really kind of fun. I mean, to show you how small the world is, we were at the party where we were, making the awards to the 5 new folks that we were bringing out, 5 new companies we're supporting this year. And he was there, and we were just kind of chatting over drinks. And I said, so why are you in Portland? And he turned to the young lady next to him and said, it's her fault. And I said, what do you mean? He said, we met, and I what could I say? But yes, I'll follow you to Portland. She happens to be someone who's in a very large position at Nike. So there wasn't much choice. He had to go where she already had strong employment. But that's the kind of folks that you run into sometimes, and when you're on the investing side. And I know full well these people are going to do well. There's no question about it. But then there's the other side of the equation. And the trend, you asked me to talk about trends. Well, one trend that I see that's really, really scary is these ideas for companies where literally they're dependent on 2 audiences in order for the company to even be viable. And let me give you a for instance of that. If you think about Uber, you've got people that are drivers, and you got people that are needing a ride. Okay, and that works out well simply because the drivers are replaceable, and they keep replacing themselves and so on. But I've seen in the last couple of months a couple of organizations that have to do the same thing, but they're in an area where they think they're going to be totally disruptive, but they have to build a website or find a way to talk to those 2 audiences. It's sort of like, what's that old Indian thing about talking out of 2 sides of your mouth? It's very difficult to market yourself if you're continually trying to get people to sign up and provide you with, okay, and in one case, the residential places that can be used for meetings and the working places, versus the people that need to rent those kinds of places and work in them. That's a tough go. And then, and I have the audacity at times to say, so, okay, what's the ROI on your business right now? And it's very difficult for them to get out of the very early phase of the founder doing everything and move to anything larger, simply because of that dual audience. It just doesn't work. I have another client in New Mexico that literally has the same problem. Actually, they have 3 audiences, which makes it even worse.
Whoa.
Say again?
I said, whoa, 3 audiences. That's a lot to try and tackle.
Well, yeah, and try to do it in one website. I mean, literally, I was on the phone with their director of marketing, new business, whatever you want to call it, the other day, and I said to him, I said, so, okay, what do you want the website to do? And he said, well, I wanted to bring me qualified leads. I said, what about the people that don't want to be a lead, that don't want to work with you, that just want to get what you're offering? What about them? And what about people that don't want to buy it right now, but want to buy it later? You have absolutely no sequences after they come to your website. You don't offer that opportunity or that possibility to any of them. And oh, by the way, that first group that you sign up, you're not doing anything for them other than certifying them. Now what? So you can imagine, how do I put this? His next request, because he's not very good at the details, was, would you mind doing one of your reports so that I can talk to the guy that owns this place and maybe we can get you on board to change that website, because we all know it needs to change. So that's the kind of thing that happens. You just have to stick with it, I guess is the way to put it. And that's one of the other problems I find with the whole process we're talking about. When a person starts a company, they're really trying to do something that's going to change the world, okay? But they don't realize that what they're doing is changing their life, because their life for the next 3 to 5 years at a minimum is going to be about raising money to make that thing work. Do you find the same thing?
Yeah, I think I've actually worked with some startups, including one that had basically 2 audiences. They're trying to do this thing that allowed, they're trying to get companies to sponsor rideshare rides that people basically, like the users who do like surveys and on their phone while they're riding to to comp the ride's cost. So they had to get companies to, and like specifically, usually like a restaurant. Okay, if someone takes an Uber to your restaurant, they'll see your ad and you'll just, or do some like survey stuff so that like they'll comp the ride. It was a cool idea, but just actually getting enough of both groups on board was a huge challenge. And it was, and speaking the 2 different groups with 2 very different like reasons why they would want to do it or wouldn't want to do it. And it's another thing I see that just in general with the startup world is that people, when they claim, even though there's like no one doing what they're doing, or like there's like, they don't have any competitors, or like there's a completely disruptive thing, you're still having to compete against human behavior and the desire to, or the resistance to change, or like the status quo is still your competition. So you're trying to get people to do something new and different, and that's inherently scary to a lot of people. And there's a lot of ways people talk themselves out of making changes, even though they're intellectually, they know it's the right thing to do. It's hard to change those habits. And so it's hard enough to get one set of clients, one audience to become paying users for your software or whatever. But if you have 2 or 3, like you said, it's almost impossible, because you're competing against human behavior and people's desire to, or kind of the way we're wired to stick with what we know. And new is inherently threatening and scary to a lot of people. So I don't think a lot of investors, or like a lot of founders, realize that aspect of human behavior. They think this is new and exciting, everyone else is going to be super excited about this and they're going to buy into it. Like, they might think it's a cool idea, but again, it's if you don't solve a big enough pain point that is forcing them to get over that decision inertia and resistance to change, then you're facing an uphill battle, because you're competing against human behavior and like the habits people have built and the excuses they made as to why that's not worth changing their behavior yet. And you're asking them to change all that stuff and pay you to do so. And that's going to be a tall order to fill.
I fully agree with you. Again, being a marketing person, I tend to look at that before I look at anything else. And the dual nature of things can really throw you off. But even more importantly, the kind of thing you're mentioning about human nature, how literally, if there's no competition, then the competition is human nature.
Yeah.
And that's almost impossible to get some startup folks to understand. That I'm going to say this, and every engineer in the audience is going to be pissed off, but engineers tend to not have an understanding of the relationships that are required in order to build a business. They tend to be more focused on the product itself and what it does and how it does it and so on. And part of maintaining sales on an ongoing nature with any product or service is that you have to build a relationship with that customer and understand, as you put it, their pain points. And this is another one that just throws me when it happens. I darn near fall out of my chair. And I literally have been in a presentation and said, so tell me, so what do your prospects think? The folks that might become customers, what do they think about this? Well, we haven't talked to any. Excuse me? I see you're laughing.
Yeah,
You've had this problem.
Oh yeah, it's a yeah, it's such a common mistake. They think they work in a silo on their MVP and they think it's amazing, and then they go show it to the potential client and they go, what about this? Well, I don't like that. And like all these things that are, I mean, I again, yeah, it's whenever it comes to communication, any sort of messaging or content, the steps I use and I coach my clients on are, okay, what's the result you want to get from this like messaging? Then you step backwards to who's the audience and what do they care about? Where are they? What are their situation? What's their pain point? And then you'll know what to say. The same thing works for product development. Like basically, what's basically the result, the impact you want to have with this product? Who's it for, and what do they care about? Why would they want to use it? What they're feeling at the point? And then you'll know what the product needs to do, or like the design needs to be, and the features, all that stuff, so that it appeals to them and gets them the result they want or the result you want. But so often people go, I have a cool idea. There's going to have all these cool things to it that I find really exciting. Everyone else is going to love it as much as I do. Then they go and show it to people and they go, meh, or they go, I don't get it. Or they go, well, why didn't you do it this way? And then the original designer goes, people are stupid. No one likes my idea. It's like, oh, no, it might be cool, but people don't buy cool. People buy painkillers. They don't buy vitamins. It's not like, if it's a cool, flashy thing that doesn't solve a problem. No, I mean, fidget spinners were a thing. It's really cool. Spins for a while, but it's like it might be a fad or like a gimmicky thing for a while, but it's not going to stick because it's just we want solutions to problems, and if you don't solve a real problem that actual people have, and you don't know what those problems are when you go to design a thing, you're just going to be setting yourself up for failure.
I remember early on when I was working with some startups, I was asking the same kind of question, and I said, so how do you know whether somebody wants it or not? And they said, well, if we were forced, we'll talk to somebody. I went, okay, here's the question I want you to ask. Would you buy one? If they won't buy one, then there's no real interest. I don't care how nifty they think your thing is or how cool they think it is, doesn't matter. If they won't buy one, you don't have a business. And I've actually had people look at me and go, yeah, but it's so cool.
Yeah, the lack of understanding, or they're so absorbed or kind of immersed in the product or in that tech world that they don't understand the outside perspective or the buyer perspective, and it's a huge problem because they're not selling to themselves, they're selling to other people. And if you don't understand it, if you don't have relationships or trust or understanding with other people, or the people that you want to expect to buy your thing, then it's not going to be it's not going to address their needs, it's not going to appeal to them, and you're going against, there's so much evidence and statistics and data that shows that this is the right way to do things, or like the get the customers involved early. And it's amazing how many people still don't get it, or like the founders that go and like open their pitch by diving into the tech stack, or not just like I say, they don't really give you a short little synopsis and like the whys and like the qualifications of the team. It seems like all this information is already out there. We're not saying anything that's new or like completely like different than what's out there, but it just amazes me how few founders understand that. Even ones that have been through accelerators or incubators and stuff, they still seem to have. So why do you think this problem is so persistent for founders? That like, why haven't they? There hasn't been like a huge paradigm shift in just the way founders go about explaining it? Like, what's keeping this problem persisting, do you think?
I guess from my viewpoint, it's a matter of the kinds of people that actually want to come up with products or services, who think that they have something that is of need or of use and so on. If they've tried it once and it didn't work, and then you bow out of that whole idea, then you can see why it'd be new people or different people coming in. And those different or new people have not had any background or have not looked at it. I mean, one of the problems that I see, and I think it's endemic here, is that they don't look at what you have to do in order to introduce a product, to take it from zero to somewhere that is going to get something done. It's amazing to me that they don't have any background in that arena. It's like, oh, I'm going to launch a startup, and they just launch. They don't look at, okay, what does it take to do that? How do I get from where I am now to get some investors? It's like, you shine your shoes, you comb your hair, and you say, I really need some money, Mom, right? And then after Mom, there's Uncle Harry and Aunt Joan and the family investors. And then the next thing is they're done. They don't have any more, or they just don't want to get involved. And so you're out to friends, okay? And so you get a few friends. And then the next thing is you've got to find some people that are, I'm going to call them angels, and get them to invest. And you would think that in all three of those stages that something would happen that's positive, that they would learn as they go forward, but they don't seem to. What happens is, well, I used to call this, I actually did a column on this at one point, and I called it lip service. When you are introducing something to your family, they don't want to hurt your feelings. So they say, well, I think that's probably a good idea. And here's $20 or 50 or 100 or 1,000 or whatever it happens to be. Okay. And then your friends are kind of in the same vein saying, yeah, I think that's not a bad idea. Well, it's lip service. And if you actually ask the question, would you buy one? Their answer would be, well, I don't really need it. And all of a sudden, when you hear those words, I don't need it, you need to figure out who does need it, or if that's something that is not going to happen. And I think, to answer your question, I think we see more and more new and different people trying to launch a startup, and they haven't really researched it or looked at it or done anything else with it, so you know what's going on. And the net effect there is that there's no way that it's going to work. I mean, it may take months to die because of lip service, but the reality is it shouldn't take that long. Am I making sense, Carl?
Yeah, and I think there's the early on, the people you talk to early on, friends and family that you initially share the idea with, they have this the social connection, and so they don't want to hurt your feelings, and they think they're being nice and they want to be supportive, when really the nice thing or the supportive thing to do is to give you their straight real opinion of, would you like, I wouldn't buy this thing, or like, oh, I've seen other things like this, it didn't work out, or like that seemed like, trying to sugarcoat things or trying to be nice, it actually ends up causing more pain in the long run, or more because people waste time and effort trying to pursue something that doesn't work. And so I think that having more, I know is the cultural thing. It would be interesting to see how much like that lip service changes depending on what culture you're in. Like if it's mainly like the US, or if there's in like places in Europe where maybe it's not quite as prevalent because of just the way that the cultural norms and how families interact. That would be an interesting, like a social study. I'd love to see that, because I think about it's a in the US, our cultures are, you don't want to ruffle too many feathers, and it's going to be nicer, and especially to friends and family. So, but I think a good friend, a good family member would be the one who could speak up and say, yeah, I wouldn't buy that. That makes no sense. Why would you do that? And that wake up call might seem rude in the short term, but in the long term could save people a lot of time and pain and hardship.
It's interesting. In my experience, the young people in Europe that are considering new products, new services, and so on, tend to start with a little bit better knowledge of what that entails. Overall, the education, the higher levels of education in Europe are significantly better than they are in the United States. I mean, sorry, but there it is. When someone comes out of a business school and starts to go to work in Germany or in England, they are very, very powerful young men and women. They know what the hell they're doing and know it well. You have to look hard at, I'm a Harvard, I've taken the senior level stuff at Harvard. Yes, there's good folks that come out of Harvard. There's good folks that come out of Stanford. There's good folks that come out of a number of the universities in the United States. But there's also all those hundreds of other colleges and universities where it's not quite that good. I'm sorry, but there we are.
Yeah.
So the reality is in Europe, I find that they are a little bit stronger going in without much problem. But they still have the same blinders on when it comes to their product, their service, or whatever it happens to be. Not as badly, but they're still there.
Yeah.
And the other part of it is they tend not to go to family first. They tend to go to friends and or colleagues first for funding. That's the differential, okay? Now, granted, there are some families that do fund this kind of stuff, but it's because they've been doing it for the last 100 years. It's just, you're part of the family that is noted for looking for new scientific developments that we could turn into a business. They do, yes, they do that on a regular basis. So yeah, that happens. The country that's most like us is Australia. It's, I mean, they have no, how do I say this? Political correctness doesn't exist in Australia.
Yeah. It's fun that way. Yeah.
I agree with you. It's fun. I mean, literally, you know, if you go in and you pitch your idea and somebody looks across the table and says, bullpucky. And you go, what? And they tell you exactly why it is bullpucky and why they wouldn't invest, you know, ever, you know, hello, you know, we could use a little bit more of that here, actually.
Yeah. I think there's the kind of trying to avoid hurting people's feelings or being offensive. I think it's gone a little too far in this country because people, you don't have a right to be not offended by other things that people do. If you don't like it, you can avoid it or like don't engage with it. There's plenty of other content or things you can do with your time. But if something's out there that you don't like, but other people are enjoying it and it's not harming like anyone, like then stop trying, like then leave it alone. And like if I think Australian, yeah, they definitely have that little more, might be seen as abrasive, but it's a lot more just like it's less PC than I think in the US. And in their kind of flavor of social discourse in that regard, I think is a healthier one than what we have in the US, where people are so worried about offending people or ruffling feathers or hurting people's feelings. And there's no right to not have your feelings get hurt about something. And in turn, like actually what really codifies is that people take offense. Offense is not given. People take it. So if you're taking offense, that's on you. That's your reaction to something that's going on. It's not the person who's doing the thing. It's not necessarily their fault that you're taking offense at it.
Right.
It's your response. But if you want to blame them for you taking offense, that's not fair because you're the one who's taking it. So I think Australia doesn't have that sort of that big of an issue in their culture about people taking offense at things and trying to shut down or kind of overly pad the social discourse so that no one gets their feelings hurt. And I think a lot of founders would save some time and money and effort and frustration if they had more people telling them, yeah, that idea is terrible. You should not do that. It's not going to work up front. and save them the time and money and stress trying to get something that's just not going to work. Tell them early and save all the hassle.
Well, I agree with that completely. The fun thing of, well, Australia is a perfect example. Because of the internet, I have, friends and acquaintances all over the world. And I kind of depend on some of the guys and gals in Australia to let me know, when new products and services come out. Never forgotten, I was in a conversation with one, and we were talking about a kind of CRM that I was telling him about, that I discovered that was kind of a nifty thing, and some good services in that regard. And he said, yeah, well, what do you think about AI? And I said, you mean artificial intelligence? And he went, yeah. And I said, well, yeah, I think it could be interesting, somewhere along the way. Well, this is like 2 years ago, right? And he said, you got to keep your eye on this one. And I said, why is that? He said, well, two things. One, it's going to happen. It's going to happen probably faster than you expect. And I got a secret for you. I said, what's that? He said, South Korea. I said, what do you mean? He said, they have the best AI development teams in the world. I went, you got to be kidding me. Now, I happen to know the South Koreans. I've spent some time there, and I have nothing but the greatest respect for them, but I didn't know they were doing this, right? Well, guess what? Here we are, and suddenly AI is the big thing. There's all kinds of stuff out there doing it. And if you look at not the big noisy ones, but the ones that are underlying a lot of corporate kinds of software, guess where they're written? South Korea.
Wow.
It's incredible. But that's the beauty of the internet. If you have an open mind and you're willing to talk to people, you can learn about all kinds of things going on all around the world very, very quickly. And, you can follow up and find out, if it's worth investing or not, and see where things are going. And I also have clients everywhere from that part of the world all the way around to Spain. Most of my clients are in the United States, but the reality is, if you have and know and understand how to work in the markets they're in, it doesn't make any difference where you are in the world anymore, which is absolutely wonderful. But the other side of that is, it makes me more of a critic for any startups and new businesses. Anybody that tells me that there's nothing like this anywhere else in the world, and I just kind of, a large grain of salt.
Yeah.
It's like, nah, I'm not going to believe that one. But there are folks out there literally who are trying to start organizations that think that they have something that nobody else has ever thought of. And the one thing that I usually say that sets them back on their heels is, okay, so you're telling me there's no competition. Really? Okay. You know what? I would prefer it if you had competition, because that way there's a whole lot of other people out there, or at least one other group of people, that's educating the market in what this thing is and what it does. Because if you're starting at zero, you've got an education problem that won't quit.
Yeah, and also, if there's no competition, quote unquote, it might often mean that there's no market for it. There's no demand. There's no need. Otherwise, someone would be doing it already. Unless you're something that's completely bleeding edge, new technology that I got the IP for, and like you developed it yourself, and there's no possible way, then there's going to be competition. If there's not, then there's probably not even a demand for it, and people aren't going to buy it. And I agree that if we're like only one of 3 people doing this in the entire world, or one of 2 companies doing it in the entire world, okay, maybe that's not a chance to get on in it, and really there's some potential for something really innovative. But yeah, if there's no competition at all on the face of the planet, either you're wrong, or there's some other red flag that means you need to do some more homework before you start wandering into a minefield.
Wandering into a minefield is a good way to put it. Okay, let me use Digimarc as an example. The reason I actually went to work with them was that I'd done some work running an advertising agency with a guy physicist who was the inventor of the product. And he was doing some other things, and we had a challenge, and basically he lost on the challenge because I did everything I could to help him do what he wanted to do, which was produce really high quality prints from digital photographs. And I just told him wasn't going to work in the first place. And he wouldn't listen. So we ran the test. He lost. He said, okay, fine, I need to talk to you. So we're having a burger and talking about the demise of this business. And he says, I got another thing in the garage I'm thinking about. Would you mind taking a look? And I went, sure, why not? Mind you, this is a dirt floored garage, rented. Okay. And we go in and he shows me, he's got a big green machine, which I think they were called scientific computers or something like that. Anyway, they had vast capabilities in what looked like a PC. And so he turns it on and there's this picture of this little girl picking some flowers. I'm going, so? And he said, you can't see what's hidden in that picture. And I said, what do you mean? He said, there is hidden in that picture a way for me to know that it came from that picture, no matter what you do to it. You can, cut it up. You can do whatever you want to do to it digitally. I don't care. I'll be able to know that it came from that picture. And I went, yeah, right, sure. Who cares, right? So he then did some demonstrations. And I went, oh my God. Okay. And he said, so I need your help. I said, to do what? And he said, all the marketing and also to help us raise some money. I said, well, what's going on? He said, well, and he introduced me to the team. A CFO who had never been in a new business ever in his life, but was a really good CFO. An IP lawyer who had done a few things, but nothing anywhere close to this. Who else did we have? An engineer that was great at writing software and so on. And then myself, I think that was that. There were just the 4 or 5 of us initially. And he said, so we need to name the thing, we need to raise some money, and we need to get this off the ground. I went, okay. So tell me more about it. I said, what is it? What is the principle here? And he said, it's called steganography. And of course, I had this totally blank look on my face. I said, what's that? And he said, okay, have you ever seen the Mona Lisa? And I went, sure. He said, are you aware that there's information hidden in the Mona Lisa? I went, really? He said, how about Van Gogh's cafe? I said, well, yeah. He said, there's information hidden in that. And then he went on through Bruegel and a few others. And I went, you've got to be kidding me. And then he actually showed me some of the paintings, right? And one of them is probably the most obvious there is. There's this kind of dash in the front of the picture, and you can't figure out what it is, right? Well, it's a skull that's been turned, rotated, and flattened, and then stretched. You would never know. You couldn't figure it out, right? But once you look at it the right way, it's like, oh, I get it, right? He said, that's what I'm doing digitally. He said, I don't care what it is. I can do this with any digital thing. And in fact, if it's analog, I can put a digital thing on it that will do the same thing. Yeah. I said, okay. And I said, so here's the $1,000 question. What do you use it for? What do you do with it? He said, I need your help to figure that out. I went, oh God, here we go. And so, make the long story longer, basically, I looked at it and I went, okay, so it's kind of a way to put, a copyright statement or something like that just put it inside things, embed it. He went, yeah, you can do that. And I said, so what kinds of things would you use that on? And he said, well, you could do it on checks. You could do it on, other kinds of money stuff. I went, oh, okay, let me think about this, right? So at that time, we still didn't have a name for it. And we actually went through 3 or 4 names and finally decided we're going to call this Digimark. And then I tried to position it. I tried to explain to people what it was in, very short terms, right? I cannot say that I was the one responsible for this, but we finally figured out that what it ought to be called is a way of digitally watermarking anything. And people kind of went, oh, I understand. Yeah, I get that. Wasn't me that came up with it. Took them 5 years to do it. Because sometimes things are just that hard to explain very quickly and very shortly. Anyway, so my next thing that I had to do was I had to train the entire team in networking and how to actually go out and ask for money, because none of them had any. They didn't know how to network. And we got engineers and physicists and financial people. It's like, you got to be, and lawyers. Hello. So, so that was my next task. Okay. So we did that, and we finally got to the point where we were on our, I think it was our second angel round. And they said, well, would you help interview people? I said, sure. So we flew people into Portland, or they flew themselves in, depending. And so I'm sitting across the table from this guy, and I don't know him from Adam. And he's from the Bay Area. And I said, so Jack, what is it you do? He said, oh, we make sure people that can get the kind of equipment they need to make their companies work. And I said, well, equipment like what? And he said, oh, well, 747s, things like that. He ran a leasing company that leased things like 747s.
Wow, okay.
And so I said, so why are you here? What? He said, well, this looks kind of interesting. And he said, the leasing company is running itself. I've got good people doing that, so I don't have to worry about it so much. And I'd like to get involved with companies that I'm investing in. I went, so what would you do for us? I mean, the hell with the money. What would you like to do? And he said, well, I'm pretty good at finding out information and, doing the spy work. And I went, oh, really? And now you have to understand, this is in the days when the internet was actually just the well. Okay. There was nothing out there. I mean, it just didn't exist in the way it is today. And so Jack became our eyes on the world for any kind of competitive product, any kind of competitive service, any idea that was even close to it. And weekly, we would all gather on a phone. Literally, we didn't have Zoom at the time, it was all on the phone. and Jack would tell us what's going on. And it was absolutely marvelous because it's sort of like an early warning radar system, right?
Yeah.
And Jack put in, I think in that round, I think he put in 100,000. And I think over time he put in maybe $500,000. But that was one hell of a fun project to work on, because literally we were at zero, and the work that we were doing was, there was educational work that had to be done. But the education very quickly became pretty easy to do, because once people, once you could see that their eyes light up and go, oh, you can do that, right? Suddenly we didn't have to explain a whole lot. They were falling all over themselves trying to give us money. I mean, it was ridiculous. I've never forgotten when we went public. That's the best party I've ever been to. Right? we had all these big round tables right in the room. And I don't know, there were 4, 5, 6 of them, who knows? And there was nobody in the room that was worth less than $4 million.
Wow.
I mean, one hell of a party. So it can happen, and it can happen where there is a huge educational requirement, but it has to be IP that's really, really different and useful. I mean, right now, that particular capability is used on every monetary system in the world except one, the United States.
Of course.
Of course, not invented here. Okay, that's the whole syndrome with our currency. If it's not invented by the folks that do our currency, then it's not important, right? But it's absolutely amazing how powerful something like that can be. Used to be Jeff, the guy who invented it. He was continually on flights going into Europe, because the first big heavy users were all the European countries with all their currency. Really made a difference, and he was always flying back through Washington, D.C. So he kept running into my daughter, who was always flying in and out of Washington, D.C. So
all those companies give them free samples of the work, just kind of, here's some bills to look at the work you're doing.
They actually had to pay. So yeah, the royalties were pretty good. I'll put it that way. Anyway, but so anything else you want to talk about today? This
has been great. Yeah, we're a little over time. Usually go for 45 minutes. This has been a great discussion. I've enjoyed hearing the stories, and I hopefully the audience has gotten some valuable insights onto how to position their presentations and think about their products before they try and get them in the hands of consumers or users and investors. So any parting suggestions or things people need to follow up with you or get in touch if they want to talk?
They can get in touch with me at jerryfletcher.com. That's the easiest way. And that's the website. and Jerry@zaccessmarketing.com is the email. Either way, you'll get there. If you go to the website, you'll be able to get the latest copy of our research on survey on what works for consultant marketing, if you're into that arena. And let's see what else. Oh, the latest book on speaking to build your business. It's called Speak Your Way to Business Riches. It's kind of fun.
Awesome.
And it opens the kimono on how to become a paid speaker.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, and have a good rest of your week.
You do the same, my friend. Bye-bye.